Support comes from Mosby Building Arts. Mosby transforms unfinished basements into comfortable spaces for relaxing, entertaining, and spending time together. Make the most of your square footage. July basement sale. Details at callmosby.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We are exactly 1 week away from Missouri's primary election, and the state's Republican and Democratic voters have some key decisions to make in competitive contests for the state legislature and congressional seats. They also need to decide on some powerful countywide posts. But there's big policy decisions hovering over this election. Voters will also decide on a measure known as Amendment 4, making it much harder to amend the state's constitution, and a proposal known as Amendment 5, allowing the legislature to expand sales and use taxes as a way to eliminate the income tax. Amendment 5 in particular is a major priority for Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe. But these amendments are encountering bipartisan opposition. Amendment 5 in particular is apparently facing a tough reception in solid GOP strongholds, so much so that Republican legislative candidates aren't willing to support it. Here to talk about how some key state contests and how ballot initiatives may influence them is STLPR State House and Politics reporter Sarah Kellogg. Sarah, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Always happy to be here, Jason.
Also joining us in studio is Rachel Lippmann, who is St. Louis Public Radio's justice correspondent. Rachel, welcome back to the program.
It's a good time.
It is a good time. And Sarah, what might not be a good time is if you're a supporter of Amendment 5, because I want to play you a montage of 3 Republican candidates running for Missouri's 16th senatorial district seat, which takes in places like Rolla, Waynesville, and Mountain Grove. We asked Bill Hardwick, Don Mayhew, and Hannah Kelly what type of reception Amendment 5 was getting in this strongly Republican district, and here's what they said.
I have knocked doors in every county in this district, in almost every city, and almost every subdivision, and I uniformly hear people who are antagonistic to Amendment 5. That because you just mentioned at the very beginning of our interview that the cost of living is top of mind for people. Mm-hmm. And so Amendment 5 is directly coordinated to increasing the cost of living for people who have fixed income and lower income.
So I don't think it's getting 40% of the vote in the 16th district. I don't know how it's playing otherwise. I'd say majority of the doors that I knock where people want to talk to me, that is, I'm going to say that's, with along with data centers, that is the things that they want to talk about.
I'm going to boil it down to this. When life feels chaotic, what do we like? We like a plan. We like a plan. Amendment 5 does not have a clear plan. And I think that's why the angst is there. I know that is why I'm voting no.
That was Bill Hardwick, Don Mayhew, and Hannah Kelly, 3 Republicans running for Missouri's 16th district Senate seat, which encompasses the Rolla area. Sarah, what do you think that clip showcases about Amendment 5's chances of passing next Tuesday?
I think it shows that Amendment 5 just has a very, very uphill battle at the moment to pass. You know, this amendment needs that stalwart support from these areas to have a chance at passing. And from those responses, from what those candidates are hearing from their constituents, I'm not hearing that. Now, you know, I want to be fair, you know, those candidates are against it. You know, this amendment got a vote of 95 Republicans in the House and 18 in the Senate. So majority of Republicans in both chambers voted for this with some campaigning. And I'm sure like with some campaigning in the summer, there will be some support, but I just think it's a very, very hard thing for Amendment 5 to reach that threshold right now. You know, I attended a town hall in Washington a few weeks ago that was advocating for Amendment 5, and I'll say the reception there was definitely skeptical. You know, some people may have already had their minds made up, but some of those questions were very, how does this work for me? How does this work for like friends that I know that are on fixed income? I just think there are lots of questions, and I think that as Hannah Kelly said that there isn't a set plan. I think that makes a lot of people unsure. And I think if people are unsure about things, you know, they tend to vote no rather than yes.
Trust me, bro, is not really a good plan, especially when the message is coming from the government.
Yeah.
We'd like to invite you to join in on this conversation. What questions do you have ahead of next week's primary elections. Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. So for context, Sarah, the 16th district's counties voted anywhere from 71% to 87% for Donald Trump. So if, as Bill Hardwick says, it's getting an almost, I don't think he said universally, but largely antagonistic reception in that part of the state. And the Democratic areas are probably going to vote against Amendment 5 by upwards of 80 to 90%. I don't see a pathway for this. I just don't.
Yeah, there isn't one. Like, simple as that. Like, I know this is a priority for Governor Mike Kehoe. It's a priority for some Republican lawmakers, and you'd assume then that there has to be Republican support for this to pass. And if it's not doing well in those Republican districts, this does not pass.
Rachel, like, both of us live in St. Louis County, and we see nothing but no on 5 signs and no on 4 signs.
I've seen a couple of yes on 4 signs.
Okay, to be fair, and I saw a yes on 4 bumper sticker yesterday, so they do exist. But talk about what role St. Louis County, and even Jackson County could play in this election.
So I think the idea that things are going to need Amendment 4, Amendment 5 in particular, overwhelming no votes from those blue dots, we jokingly call the blue dots, St. Louis County, Boone County in the Columbia area, Jackson County, even Greene County somewhat. That's more of a purple dot, that's Springfield's area. That's less important, I think, with Amendment 5, because as Sarah mentioned, as the candidates mentioned, you don't have the votes in the Republican areas to need the overwhelming majorities in St. Louis and St. Louis County to carry the opposition to Amendment 5. I think with Amendment 4, which is the changes to the initiative petition process and constitutional amendments, you may need a little bit more from St. Louis County, Jackson County, et cetera, for those two things to fail. Now, there is a concerted effort to link those two together and to link the issues together where it's, protect the voice of the voters. Some of the ideas with the tax amendment, the tax issue is, right now we have to vote on tax increases, and the idea that the state would then be increasing sales tax would take away from the voice of the voters if you eliminate the income tax. So I think for 4, it's going to be more important to have opposition from St. Louis County, Jackson County, et cetera, than it is for 5.
What's been really interesting to watch from afar is not only seeing Republican candidates run away from Amendment 5, as we saw with the 16th district. You're actually seeing some Republican challengers to incumbents use Amendment 5 to attack that incumbent. That's occurring in Southwest Missouri, Sarah, where Lori Rook is just bludgeoning Curtis Trent for sponsoring Amendment 5. If Curtis Trent ends up losing that race, is that a signal that support of Amendment 5 had tangible consequences for the people in Jefferson City who voted for it?
I mean, I think yes. I think there's instances where so many Republicans share similar votes and viewpoints. So anything that distinguishes them is going to probably be hit on again and again. And I think that candidates like, Lori Rook, who's challenging Trent, they see that as an opening and they see that as a winning position. And I think that if they're victorious over Trent, I do think that's a tangible consequence, because otherwise there's nothing really that makes Trent, different than other Republicans. I see it consequential possibly for other races that we might talk about. But yeah, I do think it's consequences.
So one of the things I've also noticed is that candidates running for the Missouri House and Senate on the Democratic side are preparing to use Amendment 5 to attack their GOP opponents in the fall. That includes Donald Looney, a Democrat running for a Western St. Charles County-based seat.
We don't like it. We don't want it. And we're sick and tired of corrupt politicians overturning the will of the voters, telling working families that we don't know what's best for us, that we don't have our own self-interest in mind when we are doing the things that we are doing, right? I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it.
That was Donald Looney, a Democrat running for a Western St. Charles County-based seat. I'll throw it to Rachel first. How effective do you think this issue will be for Democrats in the fall, especially running in competitive legislative seats in places like St. Louis County or St. Charles County?
If somehow Amendment 5 passes, I think it is a more effective argument, because it is something that is tangible. It is something that is, hey, you supported this and there are going to be real consequences on people because of this vote. If it fails, yes, I think there are ways that you can message that to say they wanted to increase your sales tax, they wanted to increase your cost of living. But the thing is, the decision will have been made by the time we hit the general election. We'll know one way or the other. And if it fails, I think there's too much else going on the ballot in November, too many other issues where you could message it, but I don't know that it would be the most effective messaging when there will be so much else out there.
And that was what I was going to ask Sarah, because I could definitely see if Amendment 5 fails, Democrats using that issue to attack people like John Patterson, a Republican who's running for a Senate seat in Jackson County, or Melanie Stinnett, a Republican running in Greene County. But I could see the argument that enough time has passed and voters will have completely forgotten about Amendment 5 by November 2026. What do you think about that, Sarah?
I think for Patterson, it's a different case because he himself was the other House sponsor of the amendment. So they can pin this idea that they were trying to, if 5 fails, that they were trying to raise taxes on goods specifically on him. I think Stinnett, ultimately it's a yes vote. I don't think it helps, but I don't think it hurts nearly as much as it would hurt Patterson.
So I want to talk about a race that's closer to home, literally, for Rachel and I, and that's the contest for the 4th senatorial district between former State Representative Gina Mitten and current State Representative Steve Butts. I think, Rachel, by default, is this the most competitive race that includes the city of St. Louis this year?
I mean, that's a barn burner of a race in the Missouri 1 GOP primary, but hey.
Yeah, I meant for state legislative seats. We're going to talk about Mo 1 later. So I want to talk a lot less about the issues and more about the potential impact of this contest. Butts is a city resident, and Mitten lives in Richmond Heights. And when he was on Politically Speaking with Sarah and I, Butts made this argument.
That is a big issue. This is still about 60% in the city, and I cannot imagine the state senator from the 4th District not being from the city of St. Louis. I know that's a little colloquial. I'm not saying someone from Maplewood or Brentwood or Shrewsbury could not represent the district, but boy, I think that is critically important.
That was Democratic State Representative Steve Butts, a Democrat from St. Louis. Now, Rachel and I may be a little biased because we are county residents who live in the 4th District. But Sarah, you're in the state capitol more than us. Is it important for there to be more than just one state senator representing the city of St. Louis going forward?
I feel like that's just such a subjective question. I think if you're looking at it, there are, more Democratic senators that represent areas of St. Louis County than just, than the city. So I think if you're looking at a numbers game, there is an argument for that. But I think there's also an argument for, at the end of the day, are the votes going to be that much different if someone lives in St. Louis County and represents the 4th versus if they live in the city and represent the 4th? I don't see those votes really going differently. So I think that maybe someone who lives in the city might be a little bit more tuned into city issues and things to bring up through legislation, but I just don't think it's a huge difference.
Now, Mitten has pointed out that she represented a large portion of the city when she was a House member. I did ask her if it would be peculiar if she won and she, as a St. Louis County resident, would have effective veto power over nominees to the St. Louis Board of Police Commissioners. The reason being that it's tradition in the Missouri Senate that if you don't have the support of your hometown senator, your nomination dies. Here's what Mitten had to say about that.
Are there people that might think that's odd? Yes. I think there's also plenty of people that won't think that it's odd as long as they feel that they're being adequately represented and that their voices are being heard. I think that's really the most important thing. Voters, residents, constituents, however you want to characterize it, we want to have a voice that is being paid attention to and heard in our elected officials. So the fact that I'm a county resident, I don't think that it impacts things. I think, again, you do your homework and you find out, you find out how the voters feel about it.
That was former State Representative Gina Mitten, a Democrat from Richmond Heights. Now, Rachel, this may be more of a quirk of the law that put the police board into place, which, by the way, Butts supported and Mitten opposes. I think it's important for us to point that out. But do you see the fact that a county senator could have so much control over nominees to the city police board being an issue from a practical standpoint?
I mean, I think part of what Butts's argument is kind of what is wrong with this region. The idea that you have to live somewhere to care about the region itself. You know, I'm a county resident, but I care how the city does. I care about what data centers might be doing in Montgomery County. I care about Kansas City. I care about, you know, how the rest of the state is doing. I care about, you know, is it expensive for farmers to farm up in Worth County, which is northwest Missouri? And, you know, the idea that you have to live to care somewhere, live somewhere to care about it more, I think is just, you know, Mitten made the point. I will be a voice for my voters, and I'm going to go and I'm going to do my homework. I've got no reason to trust that that's not something she's going to do. And she may also be a different advocate for different people on that board than Steve Butts might be. He's much more of a traditional pro-police South St. Louis Democratic candidate. What other voice is she going to bring? Does she make some of the constituents who may not feel represented by Butts feel more represented?
Now, before we go to break, Sarah, is there a particular state legislative race that you're paying attention to that we did not mention here?
So Senate District 32, I'm interested in because the incumbent Jill Carter is seeking her second term. She primaried then Senator Bill White and unseated him back in 2022. Now, 4 years later, his wife, Ellen Nichols, is running. There's just a little bit of drama there, and I can't help but enjoy that. So I'm interested in following that seat, but that's kind of what I'm keeping an eye on.
What about you, Rachel?
I'm looking at District 83, which is kind of a central St. Louis, Maplewood, Richmond Heights House district, and then State Senate District 14, which is Brian Williams' old district, sort of North Mid-County based.
You stole one of mine, and that's the 14th Senatorial District, where 4 Democrats are running to replace Brian Williams. The winner of that is going to play a major role in the potential debate over whether to carve up the 1st Congressional District. And since the 1st Congressional District's population base is in North St. Louis County, people are going to look for them for leadership. So that's one of the reasons I'm paying attention to that race. We need to take a quick break, but before we go to break, I want to invite you again to join in on this conversation. In 5 words or less, how would you describe this primary campaign season? Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. St. Louis County Executive Sam Page's decision not to seek re-election created a leadership vacuum in Missouri's largest county. 3 Democrats, Brian Williams, Jake Zimmerman, and Angela Walton Mosley, and 1 Republican, Dennis Hancock, are running for county executive, and the winner will take on the powerful countywide post at a time of great financial uncertainty. St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippmann and Sarah Kellogg are back to discuss this race and other key county-level contests. And as a reminder, we'd like you to join in on this conversation. In 5 words or less, how would you describe this primary campaign season? Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. So, Rachel, you've interviewed all 3 Democratic candidates for county executive. What are your overall impressions about what they bring to the table?
Realistically speaking, this is a 2-person race between former state senator Brian Williams, or current state senator Brian Williams. He'll be out of office at the end of the year because of term limits, and the current county assessor Jake Zimmerman. Williams brings somebody who's worked in difficult political backgrounds. Obviously, he's a Democrat and a super minority and has had a pretty productive legislative career, arguably pretty productive legislative career in areas that he may not, have the same views, police reform, law enforcement, public safety, for example, as Republican colleagues that he has to work with, and has been able to make some pretty concrete changes in those areas. He's got a negotiating background, and he knows how to defend the county as a whole. He talked a lot about bringing money back to the county to help out with things like building a new police precinct. Zimmerman has been elected countywide, and he's run a countywide office before. Now, the assessor's office, its own little, slice of county government, is not the same thing as managing the whole of county government and the whole of county bureaucracy, but it is an arguably well-run office. You can disagree with the decisions that it's made, but you don't hear about them. The office spending money it doesn't have, or other controversies there. So that's what you're looking at is two people who have different ways or different reasons that they might be able to help address the county's problems.
I want to drill down on the candidates a little bit more. Senator Williams is touting his ability in Jefferson City to bring a lot of money back to the St. Louis region. And he says he'll be able to take that collaborative approach to a traditionally fractious county council.
I saw opportunities where leadership could tell its story better. I saw a county government that felt stagnant. I saw a county that felt like it should be growing. And I felt that our county should be modernized and feeling closer to its residents. And that starts by having a county executive that not only has delivered for the county, but has an ability to collaborate and do something I've done in the most volatile legislatures in the country, and that's work with people I may or may not agree with.
That was Senator Brian Williams of University City on a recent episode of Politically Speaking. So, Rachel, I have had the distinct honor of covering the county council since 2011. And I've seen people say that they're going to come to the county executive's office and work with the council, and it always has failed miserably. Why do you think Williams would be any different than Steve Stenger or Sam Page?
I think what the next person who is elected to that office, whether it is Williams or Zimmerman or potentially Angela Walton Mosley, as we'll discuss later, probably not though, is there was a fundamental disrespect, especially for Sam Page and Steve Stenger, for the council as a co-equal branch of government. It is the idea that, I am the county executive. I will do what I want. I'm going to dismiss the St. Louis County Council as having a role in governing St. Louis County. And I think that Williams, as somebody who comes from that legislative background, understands the importance of needing to work with the legislature and how the legislature and the executive have to work together to get legislation or bills across the line, because you can have the best idea and it is the most wonderful thing, but if the Governor Kehoe, Governor Parson, whoever, decides I don't like it, and he, with one stroke of a pen, can eliminate that. So I think there is a level of respect from Brian Williams for the role that both legislative and executive branches can play.
Now, before we keep talking about this, we do have a call. We're now going to hear from Jerry, who actually wanted to talk about our last segment on Amendment 5.
Yes, I'm sorry to be late to the conversation. I'm just kind of baffled that all the people I've known for like decades have been saying, government is the problem, seem to be on the side of yes for 4 and 5, which to me is kind of like just saying, oh, yeah, we trust you to do the right thing. And I mean, I've actually seen people quote that about politicians say, well, we won't we won't do what We'll be very prudent with this, which, I mean, pardon the phrase, but it's like that's about as binding as the kiss of a prostitute. I just don't. It is baffling to me that people can't see that essentially they're stripping away our input for any changes, especially to taxes, which most people pay attention to.
Thank you, Jerry, for your comment. Sarah, what is your response to Jerry's commentary?
I mean, I think Jerry is correct in that, there is no set plan in Amendment 5, and it's pretty much carte blanche for whoever, for lawmakers for 5 years to do what they want with the sales tax. And it is true that, and that's why they need voter approval for this amendment, because in order to make changes and expand the sales and use tax, they need voter approval. With this, any changes they would make, they would just be able to do. So that is a very convincing argument that I've seen time and time again from people against Amendment 5. And I think he shares that opinion with many.
I think also the idea that, taxes, especially lower personal taxes, have always been such a red blood, red meat, conservative issue, economic issue, that the hope is potentially that we'll talk about lower taxes, lower income taxes, and don't look over here how we have to make up the revenue. It's the second part of that equation that people are, I think they're hoping we forget about.
And I think for some areas, like, for seniors, they don't pay income tax on their Social Security. So they're not buying that. Jay Hardenbrook with AARP Missouri has said the legislature over the years has made Missouri a very good place for retirees to go to and to spend the rest of their life with the tax benefits basically there. And he said the sales tax, if that were to be expanded, or use tax, that would be devastating.
So let's go back to the St. Louis County executive race. Mary from St. Louis County wants to discuss that high-stakes contest. Mary, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you very much. I've had the pleasure of being represented by both gentlemen. I think they're both great legislators. One of the reasons I really like Jake Zimmerman's background is that, and I don't think he's really talked about it that much, is that he was a former assistant attorney general for the state of Missouri under Jay Nixon. And to me, after having Stinger, and then some questions about the current county executive, I really like that background. So I think that might help move St. Louis County in a more, legitimate direction as far as, moving forward with legislation and things. Also, I just want to say 4 and 5, I really think the legislature really is taking advantage of Missouri citizens, and they think we're really stupid. And it's like this has really united both Republicans and Democrats. Nobody wants 5. Nobody wants 4. The only ones that are pushing 5 seems like they're, the out-of-state people, but elected officials, especially out in St. Charles County. And, I think that Missouri residents might finally start to figure out that we've been taken advantage of across the board. And, selling out to big corporations and giving them all the tax breaks. And now Missourians are suffering because of that backwards type of fiscal policy. So I think this is going to be total egg on their face, and I am going to rejoice in that. So on both 4 and 5 going down.
Thank you so much, Mary. And this is a clip from Rachel's conversation with St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman about how he would deal with the aforementioned hostility in the county council.
I also am not interested in pointing fingers here. Politicians from both parties and on both sides of various rivalries collectively decided not to decide, collectively spent one-time money again and again to fill a budget problem rather than fix the fundamental challenge. The fundamental challenge is that for years now, St. Louis County has had less money coming in the door on a yearly basis than what goes out the door. And anybody who has ever balanced a household budget, anybody who's ever run a small business, knows that that is not sustainable.
That was St. Louis County Assessor Jake Zimmerman talking with Rachel during a recent episode of Politically Speaking. So my observations about the county executive race is it has not been as nasty and contentious as I thought it was. But one caller, Harvey in Chesterfield, said in response to our 5-word prompt that William Zimmerman race is embarrassing. Harvey, why do you think that?
Well, I think they're both attacking each other over silly things, so that's embarrassing. And I would rather hear both of them talk about what they would do to improve North County. When you look at the county in general, we're doing pretty good except in North County. At least that's my anecdotal observation. And I really think that that's where we could stand some really good investment and good policy improvements.
Thank you so much, Harvey. And you can reach us as well in 5 words or less. How would you describe this primary campaign season? Call us at 314-382-8255. I'll throw this to actually Sarah, because one of the things that Zimmerman has been attacking Williams about is this legislation that would provide delegates to a hypothetical constitutional convention. And because of that, Williams, I guess, could open the door to a nationwide abortion ban. Williams has said that that doesn't track with his record of being supportive of abortion rights. Sarah, I don't know if you're watching this from afar. If I didn't have to pay attention to St. Louis County politics, I probably wouldn't. But is this an example of two candidates just not having much to work with compared to, say, Butts and Mitten, who really are different on the issues?
Yeah, I think that, if there isn't a tangible vote, if the point against Williams is a vote for a hypothetical federal constitutional convention, which the bar for that to happen is incredibly high. And there are so many other things I feel like Democratic senators, when you're on defense, have to worry about. I think that that shows that there isn't a lot to work with there. And I think that there isn't a vote that can be pointed to as much as you mentioned with the Mittens Butts race. And I think it does make it harder to go on the attack. It means that you have to stick with kind of what you have done and what you would do. And apparently it feels like that's not been the focus.
So let's talk about the wild card in this contest. On the last day of filing, Senator Angela Walton Mosley of St. Louis County entered the Democratic primary for county executive. And a lot of people, including me, thought this was bad news for Williams. Both Williams and Mosley are African American. And Mosley has a track record of winning votes in her district, which includes parts of North St. Louis County Williams needs to win. Rachel, you were one of the few St. Louis area journalists to actually interview Mosley about her candidacy. What do you make of her decision to run for this office?
I am not going to ascribe motives to an individual and that I'm not in this person's head. I, have no private relationship with her where she would confide in me. But I will say that if you look at what matters, which is money and the ability to get your message out to a broader range of people, she has not either raised or spent a lot of money for this campaign. For example, in the 2026 calendar year, I did the math. She's raised about $8,000, and a lot of that has been from political action committees. There's not a lot of individual donations in there. So it doesn't feel like an individual who is actually running a county-wide campaign, as you might expect from Williams or Zimmerman, who are both flirting with the $900,000 million mark in terms of funds raised.
Here is Senator Mosley responding directly to Rachel's question about whether she's running merely as a spoiler to Williams.
Well, I believe that's just somebody's statement because they were thinking that they were going to just walk into this seat. And the seat is open for anybody to run for it. So, again, the opportunity is mine just like it's theirs, and I took the opportunity to run.
That was Senator Angela Walton Mosley on a recent episode of Politically Speaking. Rachel, there's been some very public bad blood between Mosley and St. Louis County Councilwoman Shalonda Webb. Webb is more aligned with Williams. What did you make of her statement there?
I mean, I would have been more shocked if she had come out and said, absolutely, yes, of course, I'm running as a spoiler for Brian Williams. And there can be a couple of things that are true here. She may be motivated by personal animus towards individual candidates, other slates. She also has two daughters who are on the ballot running as state representative. She has her own slate of candidates that she wants to back in the North County area. She may also be using it to help boost their campaigns as well. It's very, very hard to know when, is she telling the truth? I don't know.
So before we go to break, I do want to just mention that because Zimmerman's not running for assessor again, there are two Democratic candidates, State Representative Doug Clemens and former Representative Tommy Pearson Jr., who are running. Rachel, I am having a really hard time gauging this contest because it's so under the radar. You talked to both of them. What do you make of this contest?
I think they both have their qualifications for the offense in different ways. Doug Clemens has a consultant management background where he kind of goes in and helps clean up businesses. So that's good for an executive office position. Tommy Pearson's got a numbers background, biostatistics, probably knows more about the formulas that are used to actually assess the properties and all that goes in there. They are neighboring, or their districts are or were neighboring, so they have very similar bases of political power. It's going to come down to who can sell themselves best in South and West St. Louis County, and I think there Doug Clemens probably has a little bit of an advantage.
And St. Louis County Prosecutor Melissa Price-Smith is angling for a full 4-year term against David Bryant. Rachel, you talked to both candidates. What do you make of this race?
If Bryant could raise money and build a campaign apparatus to get his message out there, I think it has some appeal to more liberal, progressive voices within St. Louis County. But the main thing here is that Melissa Price Smith just hasn't messed up. And we've seen with St. Louis City how important it is to have a prosecutor who can manage and handle the office. I don't think David Bryant is unqualified. I just don't know that he has the ability to get what could be an appealing message out there.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk about some key races for Congress and why there's uncertainty about which map will be used in November. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. With only the state auditors contest on the ballot this cycle, Missouri's congressional races could end up being the most competitive and expensive elections on the November ballot. But a looming redistricting referendum is bringing a heck of a lot of uncertainty into that analysis. And to break down some of the contests of note and why the referendum could make primary day spicier, we're joined again by St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippmann and Sarah Kellogg. So let's talk about the big one first. Cori Bush, Wesley Bell, round 2 in the 1st Congressional District. This is a very similar race to 2024. The attacks are the same. Sort of the arguments I've heard are the same. But and also Bush's criticism of Israel and Bell's defense of Israel is kind of the same. But I come down to the same nuanced conclusion. The Israel-Palestinian conflict matters because it's driving a lot of money and conversation, but it's not particularly important for the most important voting bloc in this district, African Americans who live in North St. Louis County. So I'll throw it to you, Rachel, first. How do both of these candidates deal with this paradox that I just mentioned?
I think they are both going to have to find a way to get to the bread and butter issues that matter to the voters for whom the Israel-Palestinian conflict may not be the big deal. And it's just sort of this self-serving, self-feeding loop in terms of dialogue and discourse. The more that the issues are pushed by United Democracy Project, other AIPAC-aligned ads, it becomes more of the dialogue and conversation that us in the media are having. You know, it's just a big old feedback loop. And do they have the ground game to go out to knock the doors and to break that feedback loop and really get to the issues that do matter to that large voting bloc of constituents, the bread and butter issues?
Sarah, you have covered Cori Bush's past elections before. As an outsider who covers mainly state government, but almost certainly pays attention to congressional contests, what are kind of your thoughts about how this race squares up this time?
I do think it's a fundamentally different electoral environment, political environment than even just 2 years ago. I think that some of the issues that people really, really cared about, I mean, you mentioned as far as Israel and Palestine, I think that has kind of been a flip, at least with Democratic supporters. So I think that, Bell ran at the exact time he needed to, I think, to unseat Bush, because as we talked about, she was very successful in her first reelection campaign in 22. I will see what happens this round. I think it's a very different environment.
So I talked to a lot of political insiders, and many of them feel that Bell is the favorite or has advantages because he has more money, he has endorsements of trade unions, and also backing from key Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi. St. Louis Public Radio's Annison Krebs-Carr was in Ferguson last Friday and brings us these comments from the Speaker Emeritus.
And we have a fresh recruit in Congress, Wesley Bell. He's respected from the start because one of our issues, we take an oath to protect and defend. And protecting and defending the people is our major responsibility. And he brings his experience as a prosecutor to the Congress, and people look to him for guidance on what the best approach is. In that regard, he has been a champion on protecting the victims and the survivors of Epstein. He's insisting on the truth. They're insisting on the truth.
That was former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi campaigning last week for Wesley Bell in Ferguson. So I mentioned those political insiders saying that things like Pelosi coming to help Bell help him. I could also see the counter argument that Pelosi is a relic. She's not liked by a lot of progressive voters. And this is kind of a not great move by Bell. I'll throw it to Rachel first. What do you think of the pros and cons of people like Pelosi?
I mean, the thing that actually struck me the most about that bite was going back to Bell's previous career as a prosecutor for the reason that you should vote for him. It raises the question of what has he actually done in Congress when her endorsement was he's a prosecutor, he is protecting and fighting for the Epstein victims. But I think here it doesn't change minds. I don't know that the endorsement sways entrenched partisans one way or the other on Wesley Bell. Either you are going to say Nancy Pelosi is amazing, more establishment, corporate Democrats, quote unquote, or you want someone who is a fighter in Congress. Now, there may be some people who are like, you know what, I don't agree with Cori Bush on everything, but I want someone who is going to stick it to House leadership. And Nancy Pelosi is, even though she's not officially in leadership, still kind of a House leadership figure. But I think it doesn't change hearts and minds.
So, Sarah, you were mentioning the change in environment, and what has happened is a lot of candidates who are critical of Democratic leadership and critical of Israel have won in places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Colorado, and Maine. And I spoke with former New York Congressman Jamal Bowman, and he told me that St. Louis could be added to those aforementioned states.
Every city and every district is different. We are all Americans. And when you look at poll after poll, the majority of American people do not want their tax money going to war. They want it coming to their communities for childcare and health care and education and housing. And so that's true in St. Louis, that's true in Ferguson, that's true in the Bronx, that's true in Los Angeles, it's true everywhere. The issues are the issues, and working class people are the silent majority in our country that we are waking up right now.
That was former New York Congressman Jamal Bowman, who spoke with me earlier this month about Bush's rematch with Bell. So again, Sarah, when I hear people talk about Bell's money advantage, there are other examples that I mentioned in those states where the person that won had less money than the person that lost. So talk a little bit about that dynamic if you can.
Yeah, I as I said, there is, I feel like, a big dissatisfaction with leadership in the old guard right now with Democrats. When it comes to the Democratic Party, you can see that in the primary challenges, the successful primary challenges against longtime Congress members. So those are ones that would have a even greater incumbent advantage, with newer faces being successful, like you mentioned, New York, Colorado. I'm not sure how much, as you mentioned before, the Pelosi endorsement. I don't think it hurts, but I don't know how much it helps. Like I don't think it hurts, but I don't know how much of it is an advantage, because I think there are people who are just going to see that and say, okay, a Democrat endorsed a Democrat, and I don't know how that affects me as a person living in Mo 1. I think momentum is more on Bush's side this time around, because there's just a lot of frustration from Democrats that the party isn't doing enough, which in some cases, there's only so much you can do in a minority, but that's led to dissatisfaction and of how much keeping status quo or not being against Republicans enough. I think some people are turned off about that right now.
So let's talk about the second congressional district Democratic primary, which features a showdown between Fred Wellman and Joan Van Dross. Wellman has raised more money, has more endorsements, and according to him, he feels like he has a plan to defeat Ann Wagner. Van Dross has been holding town hall meetings and says she can appeal to independent and Republican voters. Rachel, if you've been watching this primary contest like I have, what are your overall impressions, and what do you think what's going to be needed to actually beat Ann Wagner, given that she has never lost before?
I think it is going to take a map or a very large wave year that is less fundamentally friendly to Ann Wagner. And part of the reason that Ann Wagner is so hard to beat is just the nature of the district. She doesn't do much, and that's fine in that district. What they want her to do is toe the GOP line, maybe occasionally have a stance on things like child trafficking that are unoffensive issues where most people are going to say, yes, I want to stop child trafficking. I don't think a message of she's not there, she's not in the district is actually going to make that district competitive.
So I mentioned redistricting casting a shadow over this primary season. The state is using a map passed in 2025 next Tuesday. Secretary of State Denny Hoskins is slated to make a decision on a referendum on the redistricting plan by Election Day. He's likely going to reject it. But if the Missouri Supreme Court ultimately rules the referendum must be on the November 2026 ballot, then according to the Supreme Court's May 2026 decision, the map that we're talking about using on Tuesday was suspended since last December. I asked Boone County Clerk Brianna Lennon if election authorities across the state are worried they'll have to redo congressional primary elections.
I think a lot. I mean, I don't think it's at the top of mind for most people. I think everyone's just trying to knock off the things on their list. For most, especially smaller counties, the election is one of several very large tasks that they have for this election, or this time of year. We're doing tax rates and assessed valuations too. So they're trying to keep their heads above water, getting everything done. So it's not looking past that, but it is not a small concern that we end up having to redo the August election in some form.
That was Boone County Clerk Brianna Lennon talking about whether the redistricting referendum could spark redos of congressional primaries. Sarah, are you as pumped for a redo congressional primary as I am?
No, I'm not. I think this has shown the nature of how chaotic I feel like this election cycle has been with the referendum, with the decisions of whether the map be in effect or not. I think that this has just led to, a lot of confusion, and I think it could lead to a lot of consequences as far as exactly redos. And I think that it just shows maybe a not seeing the forest through the trees when it came to this issue last year. It's going to be a mess.
So, by the way, I think it's important to note that if we have the 2022 map in effect for the general election, Emanuel Cleaver in Kansas City wins, and that was the entire purpose of doing this. And Ann Wagner's seat gets a little bit more Democratic. That could explain why Hoskins is pulling out all the stops to prevent the old map from going into effect. But Rachel, in the last 50 seconds or so, it has to be really confusing for voters if we have to do a redo primaries.
Right. And I'm not even sure what the timing of that would be. Would you redo the primaries and then you'd have to redo the general with the new map if you have candidates
similar to Bruce Frank's
different...
Penny Hubbard. You do it in September and then you do the general.
But if the referendum is in November, but the map is, the map is suspended as of whatever until the referendum. But if the new map goes into it, I mean, you can see us kind of doing that meme where the guy is, looking at all the conspiracy theories.
Yes,
that's what this is like.
We are collectively doing the Charlie Day and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia right now, which was the reference.
Also the Spider-Man pointing at each other. I feel like it's a bunch of that.
That was the reference I wanted to do on Donnybrook a couple of weeks ago, but totally botched it. But I did a great job now, and Rachel and Sarah did a great job as well. Rachel Lippmann is St. Louis Public Radio's justice correspondent, and Sarah Kellogg covers all things state government and state politics for St. Louis Public Radio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
Good times.
If you want to read and listen to more of our coverage of the 2026 Missouri primary election, check out our voter's guide at STLPR.org.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wisentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, creating laundry rooms with improved storage, workspace, and everyday function for one of the home's most used spaces. Inspiration at callmosby.com.